Everything you think you know about Portugal's military is probably wrong. Because Portugal isn't the country people usually mention when they argue about Europe's strongest armed forces. It doesn't posture, it doesn't threaten, it doesn't dominate headlines. And because of that, most people assume Portugal is militarily irrelevant. That assumption is dangerous. Not because Portugal is secretly preparing to fight a massive land war on its own, but because Portugal occupies one of the most strategically important military positions in the entire Atlantic world. And it has built its armed forces around that reality far more deliberately than most people realize. So let's get into it. Portugal's military power starts with something that almost always gets overlooked: location. Portugal sits on the western edge of Europe, directly facing the Atlantic Ocean. It controls long stretches of Atlantic coastline, key ports, and most importantly, it anchors the western access routes that NATO relies on to move forces, supplies, and reinforcements into Europe. And then there are the Azores. The Azores archipelago sits thousands of kilometers out in the Atlantic, right along the air and sea routes that connect North America to Europe. For decades, NATO planners have treated the Azores as one of the most valuable logistics and surveillance hubs in the alliance. During the Cold War, they were critical for tracking Soviet submarines. Today, they remain just as relevant for airlift, maritime patrols, and transatlantic reinforcement. That geography alone already gives Portugal strategic weight far beyond its size. But Portugal didn't stop at geography. It built a military designed to exploit it. Portugal does not try to overwhelm adversaries with mass. It does not build huge armored formations meant to charge across borders. Instead, it focuses on mobility, access, maritime control, airlift, and alliance integration. The exact things NATO needs when a crisis starts and time matters more than numbers. That's the core idea behind Portugal's armed forces: speed over spectacle, access over intimidation, integration over independence. And by 2026, that approach is becoming more visible than ever. To understand Portugal's military power, you first have to understand what it is not designed to do. Portugal is not built to fight alone against a major power in a high-intensity continental war. That has never been the mission, and pretending otherwise misses the point entirely. Portugal's armed forces are built to do three things extremely well: control and monitor Atlantic approaches, move forces and supplies quickly across long distances, plug seamlessly into NATO operations the moment a crisis begins. That design philosophy shapes everything from procurement to training to force structure. Portugal maintains a professional, all-volunteer force of roughly 30,000 active personnel, supported by reserves and specialized units. On paper, that sounds small. In practice, it's intentional. Smaller forces are easier to keep trained, deployable, and interoperable with allies. Portugal trades mass for readiness. And that trade makes sense when your primary value is being first, not being biggest. Portuguese units regularly deploy to NATO missions, EU operations, and international task forces. Portuguese officers and NCOs are deeply familiar with coalition command structures, shared rules of engagement, multinational logistics, and joint planning. That experience matters far more than raw numbers when operations are multinational by default. Portugal is not preparing to fight the next war alone. It is preparing to make sure NATO can fight at all. If there is one branch of Portugal's military that quietly carries enormous strategic weight, it's the Air Force. Not because of sheer combat aircraft numbers, but because of what Portugal enables. Portugal operates a fleet of modernized F-16 fighters that remain fully interoperable with NATO air operations. These aircraft routinely participate in air policing missions, joint exercises, and quick reaction alert duties. They are not experimental. They are mature, reliable, and deeply integrated into alliance command structures. But the real story isn't the fighters, it's transport. Portugal is one of the early European adopters of the KC-390 Millennium transport aircraft. This aircraft is designed to move troops, vehicles, equipment, and humanitarian supplies rapidly across continents. It can operate from shorter runways, carry heavy loads, refuel aircraft in the air, and shift between military and disaster response missions quickly. In modern warfare, logistics is power. The ability to move forces faster than an adversary expects can decide outcomes before the first shot is fired. Portugal understands that. While others chase prestige platforms, Portugal invests in mobility. And that makes it invaluable to NATO. When reinforcement needs to cross the Atlantic, Portugal is not an afterthought, it's part of the route. Add to that Portugal's maritime patrol aircraft, air surveillance capabilities, and growing focus on space-based coordination and cyber defense, and you start to see the picture clearly. Portugal's Air Force is not built to dominate skies alone. It's built to keep the alliance moving. This is the branch almost everyone underestimates. Portugal's Navy does not try to look imposing, and it does not need to. Its strength comes from focus, discipline, and where it operates. The Atlantic is not a secondary theater for Portugal. It is the main event, and that changes how its fleet is built, trained, and deployed. Portugal operates a compact but modern naval force designed for long-duration Atlantic patrols rather than short-range coastal defense. Its frigates and patrol vessels are optimized for surveillance, escort missions, and sustained presence far from shore. These ships are not meant to overwhelm an adversary in a single clash. They are meant to stay on station, track activity, and keep vital sea lanes stable over time. The real weight of Portugal's naval power, however, sits below the surface. Portugal's submarine fleet gives it one of the most valuable capabilities a mid-sized NATO country can possess. Quiet, long-endurance submarines capable of operating across vast stretches of the Atlantic without being seen. In modern naval strategy, submarines are not just weapons. They are information platforms. They gather intelligence, monitor movement, and force uncertainty into an adversary's planning simply by being present. In the Atlantic, that uncertainty is powerful. Submarines do not need to fire missiles to shape behavior. They only need to make other navies ask uncomfortable questions about where they might be. And when reinforcement routes, undersea infrastructure, and transatlantic shipping lanes are at stake, even a small number of capable submarines can have an outsized strategic effect. Portugal's surface fleet plays a quieter but equally important role. Portuguese ships routinely deploy with NATO maritime groups, participate in Atlantic patrols, and help secure sea lines of communication that Europe depends on for energy, trade, and reinforcement. These missions rarely generate dramatic footage or headlines, but they are the difference between a stable maritime environment and one that invites pressure. And increasingly, those missions are changing. Undersea infrastructure protection has become a core concern across NATO. Data cables, energy pipelines, and seabed installations are now recognized as strategic assets and potential pressure points. Portugal's geographic position and naval experience place it directly on the front line of that mission. Monitoring, patrol, and rapid investigation are becoming standard tasks, not exceptional ones. This is where Portugal's naval approach stands out. It does not chase prestige projects. It does not attempt to mirror the fleets of much larger powers. Instead, it invests in reliability, endurance, and integration. Portuguese naval units are designed to plug seamlessly into Allied operations, share information in real time, and operate under NATO command without friction. That makes Portugal's Navy more than just a national force. It makes it a stabilizing layer in the Atlantic system. Portugal is not trying to outgun major navies. It is trying to make the ocean harder to exploit. And in modern maritime competition, that kind of quiet control is often more valuable than raw firepower. That is why Portugal's Navy matters far more than its size suggests, and why planners pay attention to it even when the public does not. This is where a lot of people get confused. They look at Portugal's army, notice it doesn't field massive armored divisions or hundreds of main battle tanks, and assume weakness. That assumption misses the point entirely. Portugal's army is not built to punch through enemy lines in a continental land war. It is built to deploy quickly, sustain itself abroad, and operate inside multinational formations without friction. Portugal maintains a professional land force structured around brigades that emphasize mobility, light and medium forces, and expeditionary capability. These units are designed to move by air and sea, integrate with Allied command structures, and operate in environments ranging from Eastern Europe to Africa. Portuguese ground forces have extensive experience in NATO and EU missions, including the Balkans, Afghanistan, Africa, and reassurance deployments on NATO's eastern flank. This experience shapes doctrine in a way numbers never can. The Army invests heavily in training, communications, and command and control rather than sheer mass. Infantry units are modernized with improved personal equipment, battlefield networks, and mobility platforms that allow them to plug into NATO operations almost immediately. Portugal also maintains special operations forces that are among the most respected in Europe. These units are small by design, but they are trained for high readiness missions, rapid insertion, and joint operations with Allied forces. Again, Portugal is not trying to win wars alone. It is trying to make sure that when wars happen, NATO has capable, ready units that can deploy without delay. That contribution is far more valuable than it looks on paper. Now we get to the part that truly explains Portugal's strategic relevance: the Azores. The Azores are not just islands. They are one of NATO's most important geographic assets. Sitting in the middle of the Atlantic, they lie directly along the air and sea routes connecting North America to Europe. Every major reinforcement scenario NATO plans for assumes heavy use of transatlantic airlift and sea lift. Those routes pass near the Azores. That makes Portugal indispensable. Air bases in the Azores allow aircraft to refuel, stage, and divert safely during long-range operations. Maritime patrols operating from the region extend surveillance deep into the Atlantic, tracking surface vessels and submarines moving between continents. This role has not diminished with time. If anything, it has grown more important. Modern competition is not just about tanks and missiles. It is about logistics, access, and early warning. The side that can move forces faster, see farther, and sustain operations longer gains a decisive advantage before combat even begins. Portugal sits at the heart of that system, and Portugal understands it. By 2026, Lisbon has made clear that maintaining and upgrading infrastructure in the Azores is a national priority. That includes airfields, ports, communications, and integration with Allied surveillance and command networks. Portugal does not need to threaten anyone to matter. It already controls something everyone needs. Another misconception that refuses to die is the idea that Portugal simply ignores defense spending. That was once partly true. It isn't anymore. Portugal didn't respond to the changing security environment with a sudden shopping spree or political theater. It responded the way a country with limited margin for error has to respond, by spending carefully, incrementally, and with a clear understanding of what actually matters in coalition warfare. Instead of chasing prestige platforms designed to look impressive on paper, Portugal has focused on closing gaps that would otherwise become liabilities in a real crisis. The emphasis has shifted toward things that rarely trend on social media, but decide whether operations succeed or stall once pressure starts building. Air mobility is a good example. Portugal understands that moving forces, supplies, and personnel quickly across the Atlantic and within Europe is more valuable than owning large numbers of high-end strike systems it would never use independently. Maritime surveillance follows the same logic. You don't control the Atlantic by having the biggest fleet. You control it by knowing what's moving, where it's moving, and who's watching. Cyber defense and secure communications have also moved from support functions to core capabilities. Modern alliances don't fail because someone lacks firepower. They fail when networks break, coordination collapses, or information arrives too late to matter. Portugal has been investing heavily in making sure it is never the weak link in those chains. Just as important is where the money is going internally. Portugal has recognized that equipment without people is useless. Retention, training, and readiness have become priorities because professional forces only function if experience stays in uniform. That means better conditions, more realistic training cycles, and forces that are actually available when needed, not hollowed out on paper. There's also a deliberate logic behind Portugal's approach to its defense industry. Rather than trying to become something it isn't, Portugal has focused on sustainment, maintenance, logistics, and niche capabilities that keep allied forces operating once they arrive. That may not sound glamorous, but in long operations, sustainment is power. The ability to repair, refuel, host, and support often matters more than the ability to strike first. This strategy avoids one of the most common traps smaller militaries fall into, spending limited budgets on headline projects that look impressive but contribute very little to real operational strength. Portugal's modernization is not about symbolism, it's about reliability. And that's why it's easy to overlook. Quiet modernization doesn't generate dramatic headlines. It doesn't come with flashy unveilings or grand rhetoric. But when planners look at who they can count on to function under pressure, Portugal consistently lands in the dependable category. That's the kind of military you notice only when it's missing, and by the time people realize they underestimated it, it's usually too late to adjust their assumptions. So let's answer the question directly. Is Portugal a military superpower? No. Is it trying to be? Also no. Portugal's military power doesn't come from scale, it comes from relevance. Portugal sits on one of the most critical connective points in the Atlantic world. It anchors access between North America, Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean. It enables NATO mobility when time matters. It provides the kind of capabilities that make large alliance operations possible instead of theoretical. Portugal doesn't look powerful the way people expect power to look. It doesn't dominate headlines. It doesn't threaten neighbors. It doesn't chase spectacle, and that's exactly why it works. In modern warfare, the countries that matter most are not always the ones that strike first. They're the ones everything depends on once the clock starts ticking. The ones with the ports already open, the airfields already integrated, the routes already secured. Portugal is one of those countries, and when you strip away the noise, that makes it far more powerful than it looks.